This is the PlayStation 5's DualSense controller, and this is the new DualSense Edge. It's the latest accessory for Sony's PS5, and it offers a high degree of customization at an equally high price. The PlayStation 5's default controller, the DualSense, got its name for its ultra-specific vibration functionality. The Edge is a Pro-style controller that improves on that by allowing players more options on how to fine-tune their inputs. However, this enhanced customization doesn't come cheap. While a typical PS5 controller will cost you around $70, the new DualSense Edge, which includes some accessories for the controller itself, is $200. In the box is the controller itself, a carrying case with a pass-through window to allow for charging, a USB-C cable, and a connector housing to secure it to the controller, plus 2 separate options for back paddles and 2 options for analog stick replacements. Both the DualSense and DualSense Edge controller look very similar to one another at first glance. As long as you ignore the red color option I have here because I treated myself since I'm a fancy boy who deserves nice things. The controllers even weigh just about the same, with the DualSense coming in at around 281 grams, while the Edge sits just above it at approximately 325 grams. The Edge features a textured grip on the handles, which helps the controller stay in your hands. It also has grooves on the trigger buttons, which is nice because you can more easily keep your fingers in the proper position. Textures and grooves aside, when the back buttons are removed, the controllers feel almost identical to use. The original DualSense has a notoriously short battery life, around 7 to 10 hours. I'm disappointed to report that the Edge comes in at an even lower 5 to 7 hours. Luckily, the included USB-C cable is pretty long, so I could still play games while the controller charged. Pro controllers give players more options for how the buttons and triggers register inputs. When connecting the controller to the PS5 for the first time, a welcome screen shows off the different customization options, both from a hardware and software perspective. On the hardware side, players can attach either half dome, rounded and short, or lever, skinny and long, back paddles to the device. They slot in and out easily and are held in place magnetically. I really appreciated this since I've used some Pro controllers before where this process almost felt like I would break some of the plastic. These paddles sit close to where the player's middle or ring fingers rest and can be mapped to any other input on the DualSense Edge. First-person shooter fans often use these to keep their right thumb on the right analog stick so that they can continue to aim while still being able to jump or duck, an input often put on the X or O face buttons. While both paddles are comfortable to use, I found the half dome option to feel a little nicer since they sit more inwards and can't be pressed as easily by mistake. These back paddles are also a great accessibility feature. Players with low range of motion for any of the primary controller fingers, the thumbs or the pointer fingers, can swap one of those inputs to the back of the controller where they might have an easier time pressing a button. For example, in God of War, you often have to press the circle button rapidly to finish off an enemy or move an obstacle aside. If the player has trouble moving their thumb at that speed, but has that level of motor skill with their middle finger, then this would be quite helpful. It's worth noting that the DualSense Edge only has ports for 2 back paddles, 1 on each side. Most Pro controllers on the market will typically have 4 of these, like on Microsoft's Xbox Elite controller. 4 is often the standard since it allows players to map each face button to the back and never have to move their thumb off the right analog stick. It's curious why Sony opted for less. The next biggest hardware tweak is in the trigger buttons on top of the controller. Next to each trigger is a mechanical switch that adjusts how far the L2, R2 buttons can be pressed in before registering a full push. Players can choose between 3 ranges of motion for these. Fans of twitch-based games often prefer shorter distances so they can press quicker and more often. For example, being able to shoot a gun more rapidly will give Call of Duty players an advantage. Again, the Xbox Elite controller has similar options for its triggers. One exciting feature that is unique to this controller is the ability to remove the analog stick module entirely. By pressing this release button on the back, the front cover can pop off. Then, lifting this lever will unlock the module and you can slide it out. This is great for any players experiencing stick drift or any failures in their analog sticks specifically, a component known to break down most frequently. Typically, you would have to return the whole controller itself for repairs, but since they're removable, you can easily swap in a working module, and Sony sells individual sticks for $20 on their website. These analog sticks are also customizable, and the kit comes with 3 options. Here are the standard caps, which are the same as on the original DualSense. Then you have 2 rounded options, high and low. These both feel the same to the touch, but just sit at different heights. These are another welcomed option as they allow the sticks to be maneuvered at different speeds and comfort levels. They're easily swapped out by simply pulling the cap off the module and pressing the new one back into place. Each of these customization options are set via the PS5 accessories settings screen. Where it gets really exciting is when you get to the intensity and dead zone customization options. These menus can adjust how fast the input curves are for any of the controller's analog inputs. For example, if you want to physically use the full range of the trigger buttons, but want the controller to register that input more quickly, you can fine-tune that on a surprisingly granular level. This goes for the analog stick's movement as well. In addition, you can adjust the dead zone, which is the center part of the stick where the controller registers no input, to be wider. Again, this is useful for any components that might be wearing down, specifically stick drift, so that you can cancel out any unwanted inputs and have the controller focus on areas that are working properly. All of these software options can be saved into a user profile. The DualSense Edge features two FN, or function buttons, located below the analog sticks. Holding either of them down and pressing any of the face buttons will let you toggle between 4 assigned profiles, or adjust the in-game audio in your headphones. It seems like a missed opportunity that both of these buttons do the same thing when held down, and don't have any function on their own when simply pressed. That said, being able to swap between profiles mid-game was quite useful, especially when jumping between different games. For example, Fortnite and Overwatch have different buttons assigned to their crouch button, so using the same profile wouldn't be helpful. The last components in the box are the case, cable, and connector housing. The case is quite nice and actually mimics some of the design aesthetics of the PlayStation 5's high panels. Inside, it stores everything in your purchase so you can transport all of your accessories together. On top of it is a window that folds down to give access to the top of the controller. This lets players connect the USB-C cable and charge the controller while it's safely stored inside. That USB-C cable is braided and measures 9 feet in length. The connector housing clips onto the end of the cable and locks into the controller itself. I'm not entirely sure why you'd need to use this, since the standard cable connection is fairly snug. Even if someone yanked or tripped on the cable, I would really rather it pop out of the controller instead of it being locked to it and possibly pulling the console off the shelf. But if you have any ideas on how to best use the connector housing, I'd love to hear them. The standard DualSense controller can be used for PC gaming through both a wired and wireless connection. The DualSense Edge can connect and register with the PC as well, but I wasn't able to get any games to work with the new controller. I'm assuming this is because the controller isn't out yet, and it's still early days for the Edge. Considering the first controller works, I'd assume that functionality is coming in the future. So who is this controller for? Every game you're going to play on your PlayStation is thoughtfully designed to use the standard controller. The back paddles are great for shortcuts and offer more accessibility for those who might lack the ability to use the typical controller properly. Otherwise, the Edge is geared towards players wanting a more competitive edge towards their typically Twitch-based gaming. If you're someone who comes to Sony for their huge AAA narrative experiences, like The Last of Us, Horizon, or God of War, then you probably won't get a huge benefit out of spending $200 on this. But for those of you who play a lot of multiplayer games, specifically first-person shooters, or any game where the milliseconds it takes to press a button are important, then you will definitely see some advantages to the Edge's customization. The DualSense Edge fills a hole that was missing from PlayStation's portfolio. Small additions like the textured grip and the grooves on the triggers are appreciated, and being able to adjust dead zone and completely replace an analog stick gives this controller a much longer life. But it's also disappointing that the short battery life of the original DualSense got even worse on the Edge. The controller feels good and offers new and more personal ways for any player to connect with a game, but its high price means it only makes sense for the really dedicated. What are your thoughts on Pro controllers? Do you find back paddles and customizable triggers useful? Let me know, and thanks for watching.